may have had the chance in February to attend one of UNL Extension's Center Pivot Management short courses to learn more about sprinkler packages, soil-water relationship, and optimum efficiency. The meetings are sponsored through a grant from the Center Pivot industry in Nebraska and by the Nebraska Environmental Trust. We've recently discussed a few of the course topics and how farmers can tune up their systems with UNL Extension Water and Irrigation Resources Specialist Derrel Martin. You recently conducted a couple of short courses across the state. Give me a recap of how those courses went.
Okay. Yeah, what we have is we have a grant that's supported by the Center Pivot industry here in Nebraska, all the major manufacturers, of course, in Nebraska, and also by the Environmental Trust. And the thrust of that grant has been to develop educational materials on more efficient use of center pivot irrigation. We estimate about 85% of the land that's irrigated in Nebraska uses center pivots today. So, important topic that we can maybe make those systems more efficient.
What were some of the topics that you discussed at these courses?
Okay. Yeah, we talked originally. We talked kind of about the characteristics of pivots, what you need to do to make them work as efficient as you can. Talked about how we match those to both crop and soil water requirements. We discussed some of the water policy issues that affect primarily limited irrigation or deficit irrigation in the state and how those might enter into management. And then we ended up with kind of a simple checklist of some simple things you can do to see if your pivot's kind of diagnose whether or not your pivot's operating as well as you might think it should be.
We're getting to that point in time where farmers will begin planting and then thinking about irrigation and probably starting to tune them up as well. What are some of the basic things on a checklist that they could do right off the bat?
Well, the first thing we suggest that they do is get a thing that's called the sprinkler chart from the pivot company. They should have one already, but if they can't find it, they can get it back from their dealer. And the first thing to do is to make sure that the right sprinklers and the right nozzles are at the right locations along the pivot. You only need to do that one time, but just make sure that things properly installed. And then once you have the right devices, if you operate it now early when you can see everything, just turn it on and do a diagnosis. You can tell a lot about whether or not the sprinkler package is working right just by looking at it. If you have a question, we suggest maybe you put a new pressure regulator and a new sprinkler in on a couple spans and compare how the old package is doing compared to the new one.
Every once in a while you'll drive down the road and you'll see one that is obviously not working. How costly can that be, or what effect does that have on uniformity throughout the field?
Well, you live with that uniformity all year, every year, that it's that way. And an example is some studies that we did up in Box Butte County a few years back in a dry year. It looked like it might have cost the individual maybe 20 bushels the acre on the whole field because they had some real non-uniformity issues in that field. And that kind of money, even with today's price of grain, certainly you can pay to fix that sprinkler package almost in any case. So,
would you recommend using pressure gauges at certain points throughout the pivot?
Yeah, the real secret to getting a center pivot and diagnosing whether or not the pivot's working right is to know what the pressure should be and then to monitor where that pressure is. We'd really like to see you put a pressure gauge wherever your pivot panel is at, where you start the machine. If you can read that pressure there and know what it's supposed to be, then you're pretty sure the pivot's working right. We would also encourage you to put a pressure gauge on the very far end of the machine and then to go out and observe that pressure when that tower or that end of the machine is up on the highest spot in the field, and just make sure that you're getting enough pressure there.
Give me an idea of why it's a good idea to match, you had mentioned this before, but why it's a good idea to match your irrigation to the soil type that you're on.
Well, the key issue that we want to look at with matching the sprinkler package to the soil is really to look whether or not we might have potential for water running off the field that we apply with the center pivot. And so we've developed some guides that they can use to look at what their soil type is. We use the web soil survey that's available it's a computer program available from USDA, where growers can find out what soil types they have and what the slopes are. And then we have a procedure where they can very simply match to see how far their sprinkler should throw the water. And once they know that, then they can go to their manufacturer and say, I need sprinklers that throw water at least this far from each side of the pivot. So it's a simple process. The Natural Resources Conservation Service also is utilizing that technique if you're interested in a cost share program like with Equip or something. So it's just critical. I think runoff's our biggest issue under center pivots, and we just have to get the right sprinklers out there.